Hello and welcome to the Skydog podcast, Horse Love, where I'm going to be talking with a whole variety of people about their love of horses. Come join us.
Take me where your river flows. I want to drive on your open road like the wilderness where we are born singing whoa.
So I wanted to go back before we even go into our relationship and your relationship with Skydog and where that began. I was actually dying just to know, from a matter of interest, what took you into large animal vet work and what was the process for that? Because I know it's massive, the amount of studying and exams and everything. So I wanted to hear about that.
Yeah, so I was one of those people that knew I wanted to be a veterinarian ever since I quit wanting to be a ballerina. So like at the age of 5, I got too tall and awkward for ballerina pretty quickly. And I was very laser focused on it from a very young age, very young age. And I was laser focused on horses from a very young age. And I grew up in suburbia. Neither of my parents know each end of a horse from each other. And I was the kid like getting good grades on my spelling bee in the second grade so that I could, go to a good college so that I could go to vet school. And never really lost that. And I never lost my passion for horses or like obsession, as a lot of my teachers put in my parent teacher conferences. I knew that I wanted to do equine medicine. I had spent some time in small animal medicine and just knew it wasn't for me. And in vet school, I could be caught saying that I would rather work at Starbucks than do small animal medicine. So I just knew horses was my calling, and I didn't really care how hard it was, and I didn't really care that the entry point for the field was really high. And I just knew I was going to do it, and I didn't see any other way. So here I am.
That's amazing. And I really have been so fascinated as well. I've done 12 podcasts already with all kinds of people, like advocates, other rescues, people that work at Skydog, volunteers. And one of the uniting things is that kind of obsession with horses that we all had from an early age that took us in different directions, but always brought horses back into our life. And I think there is something when we rescued Neptune, the Chincoteague pony that came from the island. I had read the book Misty of Chincoteague growing up. And when I shared for the first time, look, I had this obsession growing up. I used to read this book all the time. That was like my fantasy world that I lived in. So many other people, which I was so stunned by, had absolutely done the same, that their love for horses had kind of grown out of these magical books that they had read. And it's a fascinating thing to me where that love comes from, because it was almost in my DNA too, and
I feel like there's got to be a gene
yeah,
that we don't know about.
yeah.
I was like 2 years old when I found it, and my parents were like, well, this is weird. And it had nothing to do with my exposure, because I had no exposure to horses until I was 10. So yeah, I don't know, we'll find a gene. Some crazy horse person will figure it out.
Absolutely. And I was trying to think the other day, I think it was pretty much in the first year that you personally and our relationship with Bend Equine started. But I think I think it was right from the beginning. And the extraordinary thing about that is to look back and think, like, we did not have a chute back then. We didn't have a way to handle completely wild horses. And we were on a waiting list. Even before I bought the ranch, we'd got on the kind of waiting list, and it took about 2.5 years to actually get that chute to our ranch. It was kind of constantly being pushed back, and it was terrifying. And we tried at the beginning to take handleable horses so that, the chute wasn't a necessity, but we definitely had horses. I remember Hawk, for example, and I'd love to talk.
I remember Hawk as well.
Hawk. Yeah. And I remember you guys building sort of panels in the arena where he was, and that was not a fun experience. And we couldn't really get x-rays because of that, because we were slightly concerned the x-ray machine would not survive a good kick from Hawk. But that was one of many, many miracles that I would love to hear you talk about. Often I try and describe it to people and I'll say he had an injury when he came in, but Hawk was one of those miracles that we took from the BLM with that massively swollen, he couldn't even bear weight on it when he came. And I don't know if you remember a lot about that and whether you could talk us through that and the miracle that he is today running the hills with mares and up behind Sheep's Rock.
Yeah, I think about Hawk a lot. He goes into a category of horses in this like small group of horses who like pivotally change the way that I thought about medicine and the way that I thought about the capability of horses to heal and challenges what you think you know. And so I'll never forget him for that, because his injury was what I would have considered terminal. He had a massive arthritic and infectious process going on in one of his joints that most of the time, 99% of the time, does not end up with a horse that can live any sort of quality of life. And I'll never forget that day in the arena, just trying everything we could to get a better understanding of what was going on. But we were dealing with a hind leg on a wild horse. And he kept trying to allow us to be near him. And then he would just couldn't, despite all of the sedation we were giving and all of the handling. And we just, so it took a long time before we actually got those x-rays that we needed to understand. And when we saw them, I just felt devastated for him immediately, because it just didn't seem like he was going to recover from that. But really, if I remember right, because this was like 6 years ago, I think now, or 7 years ago now, he very quickly after that just kind of started getting better. He started walking better, and like we knew what we knew about the x-rays and what was going on, but he just kind of started getting better. And we were limited in the treatment we could provide him, and he just defeated everything that we know about biomechanics and the way that bones heal and the way that joints heal. And he fused a joint that doesn't fuse. He fused a fetlock joint, and that doesn't happen. It doesn't even happen with surgery. We don't surgically fuse fetlock joints, and now he's and he was thin and he was in pain, and he isn't anymore, and he's running around and living his life. And I learned in that moment that these horses, one, are different than other horses. I truly believe that after working now for almost 8 years with you guys. I have to think of them differently, and they have an ability to heal that, I've only ever seen actually in my work in Central and South America, where horses are, tougher than nails and just different. So yeah, I'll never forget him and the miracle that he was. And I always think about him, because I question, how does this change what I do with the next horse?
Yeah.
Right? Like, we still have to make decisions about making sure we don't pursue a very narrow chance that a horse will get better for the sake of a miracle happening, and not hurting a horse or prolonging their misery or those things, So I try to take what I learned from Hawk, and then also make sure that we're not doing the wrong thing for the next horse.
And I think that is one of the biggest things I remember about him, is he was one of those real borderline cases. Janelle worked so hard with him to kind of quiet a very sensitive and very nervous horse, to be able to, she was giving him antibiotics every day, but also giving him CBD, because back then, that we thought that might help, a little bit, because we heard great things, and just seeing how she won his trust. But then both of us really having very kind of heartfelt conversations about trying to find where that line was of like, is he suffering? And is that not fair to him? Or, we rescued him to give him a chance. How long do we let that chance run? And just the fine line between those two things.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, that's a lot to kind of have weighing on you. And Janelle knew him better than anyone, I kind of felt, and she had a relationship. And of course, as Janelle does, advocated very strongly for giving him
Yeah.
time. And as you say, suddenly there started to be small improvements. And then you were like, well, maybe, you know, maybe this is going to, but I always had a sort of hope for him. I thought, even when I was at the BLM, I remember one of the adoption staff looking at it when we were examining it in the chute, and Patty Wilson it was, and she said, well, if you get this horse sound, then I'll drop over, kind of like, faint or whatever. And it was, I sort of thought, well, if he can just kind of hobble about in a pasture and have some quality of life, that'll be something. But now, to see me and Janelle go up and look for horses behind Sheep's Rock, where even to get up there is so far and so rugged, and it's all rock up there, and there he is, like not a misstep with his own mares and those hills. I never thought that could be the outcome, which is even more amazing. And
me neither.
another boy that made me think of was Lionheart, because just in case people don't remember Lionheart, he was this extraordinary kind of 16-1 bay horse from Stinking Water that the BLM corrals asked us to take, because he had this massive foot that he had practically severed his hoof in the wild, maybe on a wire or something. It looked like it, you could see it went all the way through his hoof, and at some point must have been in a way dangling off like that, but he managed to keep getting to water, keep up with his band, then get chased by a helicopter. And that was the most extraordinary thing, seeing, and he did get to live wild again, but what was going on deep inside that foot eventually kind of took him out. But I was so glad that we got to give him a year or year and a half. And that was another one that you really worked with and focused on.
He, I won't forget like being close to that horse, because you just like felt the majesty off of that horse. He was spectacular and powerful, and you knew why he had survived that injury because of who he was. Like, it just, I don't know, being in the presence of him was special. And I mean, they're all special, but he was incredible. And I remember watching my first interaction with him, watching him from a distance and just being like, wow, he's getting around pretty darn okay on that. We didn't have x-rays at that time to know exactly what was going on, but he basically was very similar to Hawk in that he had just massive arthritis that had been the result of infection and injury and, instability in joints that don't heal, that don't fuse normally. And it's hard to wrap your head around what life was like for him for probably a good year while that was going on. But I won't ever forget him. And I won't forget, he was also, ultimately we did lose him to it, but he showed just remarkable capability of what they can do and how they can heal. And, he got some good time after that injury.
And I do think, what you were just saying about how it changed the way that you think about an injury. And I definitely agree. Like, I use the hashtag Mustang Strong a lot, because we've had so many cases of horses that have gone through what I thought were kind of insurmountable injuries. And they really, it's extraordinary how they take them in their stride. And, we've had a lot of, I was thinking this last year was definitely the year of the eyes. If those two were kind of foot and leg injuries, last year was the year of the eyes. But even before that, you were the one that removed Danny California's eye. And I remember Jack Sparrow was this little bay Mustang that we took from a kill pen, who actually was going on to another rescue to Lifesavers, but he had a melting corneal ulcer while he was in quarantine. Amazingly, our hauler who had him managed to gentle him. He was pretty young, managed to gentle him and took him to Colorado State University to have his eye removed. But then he traveled and was with you guys for the aftercare and kind of extra treatment. And that was another one I really remember he's just extraordinary now, living out with the herd and doesn't let it bother him.
He's just like, he was so cute, that horse, because he had come around really quickly from completely wild to being hospitalized twice, once in Colorado and then once with us with some complications that he had after his surgery. And, you and I both know there's some horses that they have no interest in being domesticated and they have no interest in interacting with people. And then there's just some that do, and they come around like in a way that you couldn't even imagine that they would let you, get close to them and touch them and doctor something that's painful to them and go into a 12 by 12 space with them and it be safe. And I remember when we first started working with him in the hospital, he had a catch rope on because we weren't sure how we were going to be able to catch him at all times. And by the end of it, he wasn't even wearing a halter and was in just like, and he's a little horse and he's adorable and, was a favorite within the hospital so quickly. And he healed remarkably quickly. I mean, he ended up with a post-surgical, infection because the original injury was very infected. And so the surgery was just the risk of complication was high with it. And he ended up with this, pretty decent infection afterwards. And then just like that, healed and was running around being, and I don't know, he was one of those, like the spirit of him was he wore it on his sleeve, who he was from the beginning and let us help him. And those are just such rewarding cases that I don't get to have that with other horses that aren't wild horses that we're trying to do surgery on. And they're not all candidates for it, right? We can't always help them the way we can help Jack Sparrow, but he let us, and that's such a privilege.
Yeah. And what I love about that from an educational aspect too, and I know this year we had both Little Girl and Wilder in the barn for months. I mean, and the aftercare of it that really only Janelle could handle, like the through the night, drops and treatments that they both had to have were very intensive. But I love taking eye cases because of how many times I see during a roundup when they give the list of euthanasias, that is so often the reason for why they've euthanized sometimes a yearling, up to whatever. And it always makes me sad to think, well, that horse was out there in the wild doing fine and living his life. And I like to take those, to take those cases and show that a blindness issue, whether it's losing one eye or I remember last year when we were doing the special needs, we had two of the horses. Arizona had a thing that I think is kind of like Tupelo honeys, and I can't remember the name of it. But also, you remember Buckley had a crazy thing where something had happened and it had filled in the gap.
Both eyes.
Yes, which was extraordinary. But I love to take them just to kind of keep drumming that beat of like blindness is not a death sentence and they can live good lives. I mean, Blue Moon runs around her pen sometimes when Lily gets going and she's in and out the trees. Like, it's like she's memorized that pen and she knows where everything is. And it's really extraordinary. And I'm so grateful to you for having kind of done a lot of the eye cases. And weirdly, we're going to be taking a mare from the BLM who's got a sort of catastrophic eye injury that probably needs her eye removed. So we'll have yet one more, but I'm really grateful that the BLM have now slightly shifted. Like, we don't just euthanize them, we will give them a chance. And that the fact they've asked us to take her, I feel, is progress, because during the Sapstein's roundup, they euthanized 11 Cremellos during that roundup for blindness issues, but they hadn't even sort of done a menace test or anything, because I contacted the vet. They had just decided Cremellos have blindness issues, which was devastating to us because we have Cremellos that have pale blue eyes and are living good lives. So, both Magnolia and Golden. But I would love to talk about one of everyone's favorite horses, Lily, and her pemphigus foliation, if I'm even saying that right. And maybe you talk through that from the beginning to now and what her prognosis is for the future.
Well, so you may fill in, like, when you acquired her, I believe you acquired her because she was sick in the pens, right?
Yes.
And they weren't sure why. They hadn't really been close enough to her to really know why, but they knew that she was ill and not eating well and away from the other horses. And she was young, less than a year old. And you guys decided to take her and try to figure out what was wrong with her, before euthanizing her. Once you were able to get close to her, what you discovered almost immediately is that her entire body was one giant scab. And her everywhere you touched her, she had a hair coat that was somewhat hiding it, I think, for the most part. But like, when you touched her, she just was this one giant scab, and she had a fever, and her blood work was abnormal and showed inflammation and infection. She was severely anemic, as a result of her illness. And I was immediately suspicious of an autoimmune condition, but we weren't sure exactly what. So that's a biopsy diagnosis. And so we took a biopsy of her skin, and it came back as pemphigus foliaceus, which is a very serious autoimmune condition where, essentially the skin attacks itself. And it can be for no reason at all. It can be in response to medications, like an adverse medication reaction. It can be an adverse vaccine reaction. It's an incredibly rare disease, thank goodness. And the prognosis is really variable. We can be unsuccessful in treating it initially. And luckily with Lily, we were able to get it under control pretty well. And her youth probably had something to do with that. And she flourished and grew a new hair coat, and became the beautiful horse that she is today. But she's in intense management because, one, we're not sure what caused her to have her initial flare. And since being with us, she's had one more that was even a little bit more stubborn than her first one. We had to use a combination drug therapy, immune modulating drug therapy, in order to get it under control. And so now, you guys are taking all these precautions to try to help see if we can prevent another one from happening. And I'm playing with her drugs to see how low of an immune modulating drug can I keep her on, and she doesn't have another flare. We have these big conversations about vaccinating her or not vaccinating her, and what are the risks there. And so, she's an intense management case. Prognosis for her over time is, it's pretty likely she'll have another flare. It's pretty likely that it will be a management issue. And what we hope is that we can catch it really early, and that we don't get to the point that we can't control it. But it's possible that we'll get to the point she'll have one that we can't control with the medications that we have available to us. And we just don't know. And so she's a very young horse to have gotten this. Sometimes they don't get it until much later in life. And so we don't really know what years and years down the road will be for her. And maybe we'll figure out some triggers and be able to hone in on that. And maybe we won't, but she's a special horse to everybody. So I know everyone's dedicated to trying to figure it out. But the downside to immune modulating drugs all the time is that she's at more risk of infection and at more risk of some of the side effects of those things as people who take immune modulating drugs are. There's consequences to that. So we're constantly working on Lily.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And another one I want to talk about that people have been very invested in is Dakota, because we took her, and I know you would be able to tell it better than me, but we took her originally because the man that had adopted her, who did a really wonderful job of training her in Colorado, the BLM staff there asked us if we would take her. She'd been returned because she was like peeing abnormally, and it was kind of scalding her legs and everywhere else. And we brought her. And that was just a real mystery of constant re-diagnoses and trying to figure out, like, originally it was kind of EPM possibility and was treated for that. And she definitely showed a huge amount of improvement with her muscle kind of thing. Right. But eventually, if you would talk us through that and the extraordinary fact that she went to, unbelievable. You see,
Well, I think most people, most equine veterinarians go their entire career without seeing this condition. And that is that she ultimately had something called an ectopic ureter. And that is where the tube that goes from her kidney, instead of emptying into her bladder, just by, chance, was emptying into her vagina instead of into her bladder. But it took us a long time to figure it out. One, her history was a little bit confusing for it, because ectopic ureters, typically they had urine scald for their entire life, because obviously the plumbing is wrong, and so initially it was like, well, has this horse had this her entire life, or did she just develop this? And that was unclear. And we upon our initial evaluation, it can be very difficult to see that tube is wired wrong. When we do all of our endoscopic examinations, everything's very collapsed on itself, and it can be really tricky to get that diagnosis of, oh yeah, there's a little bit of urine coming out of the wall of her vagina. It's maybe surprisingly hard to see that and know that's what's going on.
Yeah.
And it was, she had this very high titer for EPM, and we thought, well, let's just treat that and just see, because EPM can do any number of neurologic abnormalities. And then she got better. So then that was confusing, right? Because we gave her some antibiotics, we treated her for EPM, she got way better. In fact, we didn't really circle back around to her for, I think she was good for like a good year and a half or so, where we were happy with where she was at. And then her urine scald really started to take its toll on her and become a real quality of life issue, where she couldn't live like that. And so we came back to the drawing board and repeated some of those diagnostics. Now, when we repeated some of those diagnostics, some of her anatomy had changed as a result of this chronic condition that she had. And so we could really actually say, okay, no, there's actually something anatomically wrong with her that we couldn't appreciate before. And so, in people and sometimes in dogs, the treatment for ectopic ureter is rerouting that ureter into the place where it's supposed to go. It's a really difficult, challenging surgery in horses, because accessing their bladder is really difficult. And so the treatment was ultimately to remove the kidney that was creating the urine going to the wrong place. And very luckily for her, she handled the surgery brilliantly, had zero complications whatsoever, and is living her life scald free, which is just amazing. Amazing. Yeah.
I'm so thrilled. I mean, it really, hearing you describe the things, because often, you work very closely with Janelle, and I'm particularly squeamish about eye things and certain things. So like, I don't always do the deepest dive into their medical stuff, and it just, I was kind of thinking, like, when you said earlier that some vets will go their whole career without seeing that condition, do you enjoy the enormous scope of the amount of horses we bring in, obviously, and the fact that many are special needs or mysteries or coming from kill pens and maybe have been exposed to all kinds of things? Is that something, I hope there is something positive about it, but I know that Wade Walker, the vet that did Waldo's knuckled over feet, he originally said, Claire, I mean, what are you even thinking? Like, this donkey really needs to be put to sleep. And I remember him coming back and apologizing. He then took the time to call and contact at least 7 to 8 different specialists and came back and said, Claire, I'm really sorry. We can do this. We can do this. And I'm sorry I ever doubted that we could. And I was like, no, I would have thought the same thing too, but he managed to do that and cut the digital flexor tendons and everything. And we're now going to probably take in 2 more horses with that. But he was saying, look, I'm going to write a paper about this so that people understand what we did. And I just feel like that is such an amazing thing that we can, because I know a lot of rescues will immediately go to euthanasia. And I also am very appreciative of the fact that we are funded so incredibly well that we can take on cases that, and I would never say to rescue, you shouldn't just euthanize them, but I understand they don't have funds for the treatments a lot of times. But I also think there is something really positive in the fact that by doing these things, we're maybe at least putting that there is an option, you know, for that horse owner or donkey owner that maybe like they love that horse so much. And I saw one on wheels last night, funnily enough, of a horse with that same foot condition. And I wonder if they're, you know, like, I love the fact that you see so many different things and that, you know, it tests your mettle, you know, that maybe there are things you only learned in vet school and suddenly you're actually having to practically treat that and look into it. And I know with Zephyr, you did an enormous amount with Zephyr and Ziggy. Now Ziggy, obviously we lost Zephyr with the herpes thing, but the fact that you took the time to call other vets and specialists and talk to them about the possibility of what's going on and why would they have contracted this herpes and it take them down and not really affect the rest of the residents, you know, even donkeys and horses around them. And that's what blows me away about you as a person. This isn't just something you do 9 to 5, but you always have gone above and beyond, you know, in the same way that Wade Walker did. It's like, you're not just like, oh, I don't know about that. It's like you literally take so much time to find out everything you can about zebra herpes and whether it is, you know, EHR 9 or 1 or 4 or, you know, and so I think I feel like we could not have a better vet team helping us. And I can't even try and count how many horses and donkeys' lives have been saved. I think Woodstock being one of them, because Woodstock, you know, was so vulnerable when he was born and spent a good long time with you guys, you know, and I remember you did a surgery on him. You had to use tools from the small animal hospital because he was so tiny to be able to do all that stuff on his trachea. So honestly, I know I say thank you a lot, but from the bottom of my heart, and I know everyone that follows us and works at us feels the same, that you have worked miracles and that the time and effort you put into helping these animals is second to none. So really, thank you.
Well, thank you. It's a good way to make a girl try to cry on a podcast, but also, you know, I'm working with a tremendously capable team too. So in our hospital, we have a brilliant surgeon who called in the small animal surgeon to work on Woody, and we have an internal medicine specialist. And so I'm definitely not alone, and I'm not the one doing the surgeries either. But you had originally asked like what it's like for me to take on these cases, and you know, for any of my other clients listening, hopefully they don't take this the wrong way, but it's truly my favorite work that I get to do for a lot of reasons. One, it's always challenging, and it may or may not be something I actually learned in vet school that I have to see and try and treat. And I wouldn't want to do this job like, you know, if it was boring, but it challenges me as a person. It challenges me to be a better doctor. It challenges me as a horsewoman, as, you know, as lots of different aspects of who I am and want to be. I get to expand myself by working with Skydog, but also there's something so incredibly unique about these horses can be given this incredibly top-notch treatment by you guys and a chance by you guys. And the only thing that they have to do in their lives is live a happy life. That's it. No, I mean, it's very rare that I get to work for people who would put tens of thousands of dollars into a single animal, and the only thing that they have to do is live a happy life. And that's the only goal. And I don't know that I will ever be able to work in a situation where that is the outcome. That is the goal. They can have the gold star specialist team in the world if they can live out their lives. And that's so rewarding. That's so rewarding.
Oh, way to make this girl cry on her own because that really touched me hugely, because I understand what you mean by that. Like, usually you're repairing a horse to do a job or to compete or
job.
Sorry, you made me cry. Well done. I wanted to touch on one last horse because we're nearly out of time and I don't want to take too much time. Mr. Tank. I just want to talk about Mr. Tanky, my Valentine Tank, and just talk us through the condition that he came in with, I mean, you know, for me, it was incredibly touching because to be told by the girl at the kill pen, you know, no one wants this horse because he's fat and ugly and is a walking vet bill. And for that, I immediately rose to the challenge of like, okay, we're the people to take this horse. And we thought he would have endless vet bills in terms of Cushing's or kind of some kind of metabolic condition that was, you know, not allowing him to process his food. And I mean, I think he had probably been just fed, you know, Fruit Loops or something before then, because those fat pads, to see him now, but I know he had a condition with his mouth and I would love to hear that. But now to see him out, living out with Apollo's herd, you know, lean and muscled and looking incredible. He even lost too much weight this year and we had to bring him in.
Yeah.
The fact he doesn't have the front teeth, he can't forage as well as the rest. But that, I would love to end on Tank because he is such a special.
Okay. Are not so fatty, fat.
Yeah.
Yes, we definitely thought he was metabolically disturbed by looking at him. I would have bet a lot of money, but also I've learned to not bet a lot of money on what's going on in the Skydog horses because they're always surprising me. So yeah, he was very, very overweight. And then what we soon discovered about him is that he had a condition with his incisor teeth that I see all the time in domestic horses. And interestingly, we don't see it as much in the Mustangs at Skydog. And I would love to know why. I would love to know why our domestic horses tend to have this disease, and I'm just not seeing it in the fairly large population of horses that you have. But he did. And it's a mouthful, but it's called equine odontoclastic tooth resorption and hypercementosis. But it is, I know, we shorten that to EOTRH most often. It's a condition of older horses where their incisors become really large, and you know, you take something that's shaped a bit like my pinky, and then it looks like a chicken wings that you would, drumsticks that you would order. The roots become big like this, and they start to eat away at the bone of the upper and lower jaw, and it's incredibly painful. And we don't really know what causes it. We're still learning a lot about this disease, and the only treatment for it is to remove the teeth. And they do incredibly well without their front teeth. I mean, if they have to graze for a living, they probably wouldn't survive, but they can actually graze with just their bite plate, and they learn how to do that. And their pain is instantly gone. And so it's a surgery that I actually really enjoy performing. It's kind of barbaric looking when you take out all the teeth of a horse, but that they are instantly better. Despite having a big surgical wound, they usually express relief immediately. And so it's a really rewarding surgery. But I remember thinking, how the hell am I going to take the teeth out of a wild horse?
Yeah.
And well, thankfully for the chute, right? There's so much we couldn't do with these horses without the chute that you guys have.
Yeah.
But he also let us do it. I mean, there's plenty of horses we put in the chute and we're not going to get anything done. We're not going to touch their face, you know, and we're certainly not going to remove their teeth.
Yeah.
But he decided to let us do it. And we took out his top teeth first, and then we came back and did his bottom teeth. And I remember when we came back to do his bottom teeth, because I was 8 months pregnant.
Yes.
And I don't know if you remember this, but it was really cold. And so the team had put up these tarps, and then you guys brought in this big blower propane heater thing. Yeah. And I'm sitting there in my chair, 8 months pregnant, taking the teeth out of a wild horse. And I'm like, someone get a photo of this and putting it up on my wall.
No, and it's crazy that happened. It's crazy that you managed to get it done. And it was something I definitely could not watch because of my squeamish nature. Yeah. It was brutal to see, but to just keep focusing, and I try to do this often, is just keep focusing on the rest of his life, that he's going to live pain-free, and, you know, this is going to be forgotten by him. And, to see him out there and he is hysterical. And I'm always really careful when I'm giving the horses treats, because I've been bitten a number of times accidentally. But Tank, you just get this gummy on your, and it's just the sweetest thing. He's just, I love him. And yeah. So
Yeah.
we'll,
And he
we'll
wasn't metabolically disturbed. He
no.
just did well, just getting a normal horse diet. Like someone must have been like feeding him corn cobs and watermelons. Like honestly, it
I
just,
know, how
yeah.
crazy. Well, I cannot thank you enough for taking the time out. I hopefully will see you back up in Oregon soon. I honestly, it would take me all day if I was going to go on about how much you mean to us and how lucky we are to have you. And honestly, when we moved to Bend and I sort of got the impression that most people in Oregon were not big fans, because on the Mustang Oregon groups, people were quite hostile towards us. In the midst of all that, I kept hanging on to the fact that thank goodness we had landed in a place with a vet team and a vet hospital so relatively near us, because we're in the middle of nowhere, that we have been able to rely on for everything. And I don't think we've ever had, I mean, we've lost horses and that is sad too, but the amount of wins we've had. And I think that's why, I know when we lost Rain and Renegade, I think it hit me so hard because we had such a bunch of years of just winning, horses that should have or not made it, kept making it. And then I think that was kind of the year where I sort of realized, I'm not God, there are always going to be the ones that we can't save. There are always going to be the ones that, are going to break our hearts.
Or shouldn't,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's been, I think we've had way more wins than losses. And I thank you entirely for that. Can't wait to see you back at the ranch. And thank you. I know this is not what you would love
Thank
to
you for
do.
trusting me with it.
No, love you.
Yeah, being on camera.
Thank you, Shannon. I
All
appreciate
right.
it so much. All right. See you soon. Bye.